Welcome, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the final History of Medicine and Science lecture for this year. Great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mirjana Moffat, who has spoken to us several times before on a whole range of medical historical topics, from the Monroes to quarantine. And now she's going to tackle yet another different topic about the most famous anatomy textbook ever, the Andreas Vesalius' book called The Fabric of the Human Body. So without further ado, please welcome our speaker, Mirjana Moffat.
Salvete omnes. Nomen mihi Mirjana est. Gratia ago vobis, cum hic veneritis hac vespera. Nunc lorquam de seculo sexem decem de anatomia moderna et professore anatomiae et chirurgiae Andreas Vesalius Bruxellensis. Have you had enough of Latin? Okay, well, good evening and welcome. Tena koto katoa, dobra večer I dobrodošli. It is my great pleasure to greet you again here in this beautiful Barnet Theatre. Before we start, before I take you to the 16th century, I would like to make few acknowledgements. This time, as Terence says, you've seen me quite a few times. This time, I would like to give shout out to 3 ladies, 2 gentlemen, 1 department, and 1 course. Right, 3 ladies that I would like to say a very big thank you. My 3 Croatian friends, Ksenia from Auckland, Neves from Palmerston North, and Maya from Wellington. Without you ladies, I don't know what to do. 2 gentlemen that deserve a very big thank you are our Chris Smith, curator from the Anatomy Museum here at Otago University, and of course, Richard German, divisional, sorry, I don't know what your title is, divisional manager, but the man of such immense knowledge in history of medicine, and also my go-to person whenever I need some of these beautiful books. The department that I would like to express my big thank you is Otago Medical School for all your understanding and support. Thank you. And also, a course. This year, I did 2 semesters of Latin here at Otago. And as you can imagine, I like to show off. So if you enroll, you will be just as fluent as me. Now, thank you very much. Oops. Yeah. And I would like to start with tonight's talk. The first thing I would like to ask you is, you were all students, you all studied. Do you remember your teachers? And if you do you remember them as being smothering to death, or they were very inspirational and they did something really that inspired you? So, how did you react? What happened whenever you had some of those revolutionary ideas? Did they support you, or did they just flash you and say, sorry, it wouldn't work? So with that in mind, I would like to take you to the 16th century. And before I take you to the 16th century, I would like to take you, let's say, to the 13th century. And although you might think that it is far too smothering, if you remember my talk about Dubrovnik and the quarantine, and last one about the medical care and doctors in Florence, you might remember that I told you that the 13th century, 12th century, and the 13th centuries were the centuries of medieval Renaissance, because everything was flourishing. And so there is no wonder that in 1222, one of the most prestigious universities University of Padova was established. It will be the university that would give primarily emphasis on physics, medicine, and philosophy. But with no further ado, is that what you say? Let's go and meet a great teacher and the father of modern anatomy. So I'm not going to talk too much about medicine before Vesalius. I would invite you to watch one of the lectures by Professor Terence Doyle on Galen, the Prince of Physicians. Is that correct? So you can find all those talks on the YouTube under the channel of Otago Medical School Alumni Association. And also, I would like to invite you to watch Chris's talk about Anatomy Museum at the University of Otago. I would like to give you a little overview about Vesalius's early years in education, but as described, as seen through the lens of my beloved Alexander Monro Primus. Sorry, I'm from Europe. I get so emotional when I talk about these time periods, so you will forgive me any lingos. Then we will talk a little bit about student of medicine arriving in Italy, his professorship, and of course, the Humani Corporis Fabrica Libris Septem, his capital work. And also, you who follow me who watch my lectures, you probably know that I like to do a documentary film, and usually it takes about 15 to 20 minutes. Some might think that I smother, so this time I'm not smothering you with one, but with 7. Okay, so, and then we will talk about Vesalius's legacy. The timeline, as I said, 1222, University of Padua. So basically, 2 years ago, they would have celebrated their 800 years of existence. Yes. In 1514, Andreas Vesalius was born. I'm not going to tell you that it was on the 31st of December, blah, blah. You can read that, in 10 minutes, you can Google it and you will be expert on Vesalius. So what I'm going to do is how the others perceived his revolutionary ideas. And it did not always go well. 1537 to 1544, he was a professor of anatomy and surgery at the University of Padua, and he was working for 4 years on his capital work. In 1547, the Humani Corporis Fabrica Libris Septem was published in Basel. It consisted of 658 pages and over 273 drawings. And now, I like to do a little bit of maths. If there were, let's say there were around 273 or 280 or even 300 drawings over 400 years, when we divided by 4 years, we divided by 12 months, weeks, it would turn out to be that the artist did 2 drawings per week. That's a lot. Okay. So what is anatomy and why do we love anatomy? The best answer to that will be in this short video clip that I would like to give my thanks to Chris Smith and his assistant, Rachna Lutra, whom I always call Lakshmi, I don't know why, because they helped me in putting it together. Thank you very much. Studying anatomy is an inevitable part of natural and health sciences. It is a part of morphology, which is a science about the form and the structure of the living organisms. When we talk about anatomy, unless we are very specific, we usually refer to the structure of the human body or the fabric that our body is made of. Anatomy is a macroscopic anthropotomy because we can see the body structure with our eyes. And to see what is inside of our external cloak, the skin, we need to dissect it. And this is how anatomy got its name. The word anatomy comes from Greek anatemne, which means to cut open, and by that it describes the means of how the body structure is being studied, not what it is about. Nowadays, for most students of medicine, dissecting a cadaver or its part is a natural course toward becoming a doctor. But it was not always the case. Not until the 16th century, when a young graduate of medicine came to one of the oldest universities in Italy, the University of Padua. Here, he would revolutionize the way anatomy is taught and understood for generations to come. He would become known as the father of modern anatomy. And I'm talking about Andreas Vesalius, of course. Who was Andreas Vesalius, and what is it so interesting about him? Well, according to the manuscript by Alexander Monro Primus in his History of Anatomy, published around 1752, he tells literally, he was born in 1514, descended from a family of many of whom had been physicians. Here he's referring, his father was a court pharmacist, his grandfather was a medical doctor, and his great-grandfather was one of the professors at the University of Leuven. When a boy, he dissected dogs, rats, and other animals, and studied in the University of Leuven, Paris, Montpellier, and at Paris. So if you remember the flyer, there were 3 photos. The middle one was of Vesalius, then it was De Humani Corporis Fabrica, and this one, this is actually that manuscript where he writes about Vesalius. So what else does he say about him as a student of medicine when he moved to Paris in 1533? When very young, applied to anatomy, was Silvius and Andernacus scholar, but says he taught no anatomy by them. So you can imagine he was vocal even then, when Primus in the 17th century knew about very little, how very little he learned during his Paris years. Because of the war between, this is my comment, because of the war between the French King Charles and the Holy Roman Emperor French King Francis I, and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, young Vesalius returned to the University of Leuven and continued his studying medicine, where he would complete his studying by producing a thesis in 1537, which was a kind of a commentary to the 9th book of Rase. And then he would decide to go to Padua. And what better way to learn about Padua than me taking you there? So here there is a little bit of Padua, a little bit. I'll put my tripod pro, so it's a little bit wobbly. So please These clicking sounds weren't my joints. These were actually the wobbly camera. So he became a young professor. He was offered professorship in 1537. He stayed in Padova for the next 7 years. This is what Alexander Monro Primus tells or writes about him. When 23 years of age, he was made professor of anatomy and surgery extra ordinem in the University of Padua by the Senate of Venice, and thus was the first anatomist in Europe who had a public salary. Can you imagine? That must have given a little bit of thought, okay, he's the only one who gets paid and the first one, and he's only 23. So sometimes that it didn't go very well, and we will see why not. Now, why am I telling you about Andreas Vesalius? I suggest that he better tells you about who he really is. And for that, I would like to let you know that this clip is the official clip at the university, at the Museum of the University of Medicine in Padua, or anyway, the Museum of Medicine. And you will see there is a young student in this clip. He's from the 21st century. His name is Federico, but known as Sleepy. I don't know why, but you will know. It's very interesting. Here is the subtitles later.
Benvenuti nella sala dell'anatomia. Qui parliamo di come è fatto il corpo umano e di come lo si può scoprire. Il mio nome è Andrea Vesalio, medico e anatomista fiammingolo di grande fama. Dal 1537, dottore in medicina presso l'Università di Padova e titolare della cattedra di chirurgia e anatomia. A soli 23 anni, non per dire. Il mio capolavoro è il libro De Humani Corporis Fabrica e senza troppa modestia posso affermare di essere il padre dell'anatomia moderna. E dimmi, giovanotto, tu sai definire esattamente che cos'è l'anatomia?
Esattamente, dunque, dal greco anatoma uguale dissezione. L'anatomia umana è principalmente lo studio scientifico della morfologia, cioè della forma del corpo umano. Il metodo principale di indagine, come dice il nome, è la dissezione.
E qui ti voglio. Dissezione e osservazione. Ai miei tempi c'era una scollatura profonda e non più tollerabile tra la teoria e la pratica. Bene, io ho messo in chiaro proprio questo. Bisognava assolutamente formare dei medici che fossero in grado di mettere in pratica tutte le conoscenze teoriche imparate sui banchi dell'università. Il tavolo settorio diventava quindi il punto cruciale dell'esperienza medica. Viso e tatto, osservazione e uso delle mani, esperienza, logica. E cosa è successo di conseguenza? Con la maggiore esperienza pratica è aumentata la conoscenza dell'anatomia e con la maggior conoscenza dell'anatomia abbiamo potuto rivalutare tutte le teorie dei grandi maestri del passato, Galeno in primis.
Ma questo Galeno che nominate sempre, chi sarebbe esattamente?
Galeno era un medico e filosofo greco vissuto durante il secondo secolo d.C. Le sue teorie anatomiche hanno dettato legge nella medicina europea per 13 secoli. 13 secoli. Poi sono arrivati. Galeno era un mito. Era l'autorità massima che nessuno mai, prima di me, aveva osato mettere in discussione. Solo che Galeno non aveva mai effettuato una dissezione sul corpo umano. No, perché lui lavorava sugli animali. Ma dico io, come fai a pretendere di conoscere il corpo umano se non lo operi? E come puoi pretendere di insegnarlo agli studenti se loro non lo possono toccare con mano? Ma con me le cose sono cambiate. Le lezioni di anatomia sono diventate strumento di didattica e di studio. Gli studenti potevano toccare con mano il cadavere. Inoltre usavo delle grandi tavole anatomiche per illustrare con disegni e didascalie ai miei studenti quello che osservavo sul tavolo settore. Ed è così che ha avuto inizio l'anatomia moderna. Ora venite con me all'interno del mio libro De Humani Corporis Fabrica.
Mettilo un po' più sotto il cuore, sotto il cuore. Ok, questo è l'intestino. L'intestino è l'intestino sotto, quello devi sapere l'intestino sotto. Ah, quella era la cosa, quella era la tiroide, non sapevo neanche, questo era il cuore, lo stomaco, l'intestino l'abbiamo fatto giusto.
Right. So I do apologize for the background noise. That's from those clips that are all over the museum. So my apology for that. Okay, so one of the rooms that I really found very impressive was in that Museum of Medicine in Padova, about what kind of instruments he used and what anatomy was performed in practice. Here we have the original of his dissection tools, and there is also the description of it. No anatomist should be without an anatomy theater. This is one of the most famous anatomical theaters who was made permanent and inaugurated in 1595. Unfortunately, it happened after Vesalius' time. However, it's very, very impressive. It consists of 7 rings, and because it's so old, I think the last lecture was in 1870 something. So it is really, they're really trying to preserve it. Unfortunately, nobody, no tourist or anybody is allowed to go inside into one of those rings, but you can stand from the bottom. Actually, you can stand from the place where they were actually lifting those cadavers up. And believe me, it's not a very pleasant feeling when you know you stand where there were those cadavers being brought in. There is a chair where the professor would just read. So during the dissection, there were 3 people involved in it. A professor who was just reading, his assistant who was pointing, and the barber who was actually doing the actual cutting. So it's very dark in it, but it's absolutely stunning. And the only light that you can see there is the candlelight. So when I walked in, there was actually a bloke coming out of that small space. And the space is so small, it's basically the length of the cadaver. I hope I managed to capture a little bit of it. And if I have not, I'm sorry if it's too dark, but you will still be able to see it a little bit. Before you enter the amphitheater, there is a script that says, Mors ubi gaudet succurrere vitae. This is the place where death delights in helping life. Basically helps students to get, and this is what it looks like. So, pulling. Tripod just snapped where the camera was. And this is what it would look like with a cadaver. So I was basically standing underneath. Okay. Here we have a whole of anatomy. This is one of the oldest parts of the university. Here the ceiling dates back to the 1300, and those little murals, these frescoes of flowers date from the same period. This is the portrait of the 4 anatomy professors. That's probably one of the most interesting and most remarkable walls that I've found so far. So the four professors are, of course, Andreas, Vesalius, Bruxellensis. Then we've got the Realdus Columbus, who was his successor from 1544 to 1547. Here we've got Gabriele Fallopio, that is known for fallopian tube. He was teaching medicine at or anatomy, sorry, at Padova from 1548 to 1563. And here we've got Girolamo Fabrizio d'Acquapendente, who was also known as the father of embryology. He was there from 1565 to 1660. And on the other side here we can see some other prominent professors. So they had them by centuries, how in which century they appeared. And do you know what these are? These are actually the skulls of some of the professors. Yes, and there are more. There are more. Yeah, we love our professors. Well, now when we talk about his capital work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, it is of the fabric that our body is made of. This is what Alexander Primus says about him. The year following publishing of Frenelius' work in 1543, Vesalius published his Anatomy, which book has been of greatest service on several accounts. In it, we have great many new things discovered, the descriptions of great many others corrected, and I think this is the first line here, so this is this part. So again, everybody acknowledges his contribution, but there are people who were not always so keen on his revolutionary ideas. This is what Primus says further on. By it, the spirit of industry and emulation was raised, which produced wonderful effects, and then it paved the way to other ingenious men to dare to contradict what Galen and Aristotle advanced, which before him scarce was attempted, even when almost they evidently talked contrary to reason and evidence. Vesalius' criticism and refutation of Galen at the age of 28 could not miss to procure him a number of adversaries, rightly so, who endeavored to decry this book as much as they could, which produced a quite contrary effect to what they would have wished. For instead of recanting of what he had said in his first edition, he, in the second edition, 12 years later, criticized much more severely on Galen and endeavored to answer the objections some of his adversaries has made, and the second edition is larger than the first one. So there is again a criticism of his work. One thing further to be remarked of both his description and figures, that notwithstanding his insulting Galen so much on his description of the parts of the brutes instead of the human body, he has obliged sometimes for want of human subjects to use the part of the brutes, and has not mentioned the difference, but allows his reader to mistake them for the parts of the human body, such as description and delineation of the muscles of the globe of the eye, of larynx, of kidneys, and some other organs. So he wasn't that blameless. Now, we've got here De Humani Corporis Fabrica. First edition was published in Basel in 1543, the second in 1555. And this is a depiction from my book that I wrote on Alexander Mondro Secundus. and my encounter with De Humani Corporis Fabrica. As you know, in special collections here at the University of Otago, we have the second edition copy, and it has always been my dream, even as a young student of medicine, to be near that book. And that dream came true. I described it in one of my papers, and this is just part of one of the assignments for my library paper. So I hope you will enjoy it. And these are depictions from my garden.
Apart from the term foramen Monro, I did not know much about the Monro professors. I was told briefly that there were 3 Monro professors, each a chair in anatomy at the University of Edinburgh, and that they held that position for 126 years. I was given the book called The Monro Collection in the Medical Library of the University of Otago by Douglas W. Taylor, a descriptive catalogue of each and every book and manuscript in the collection. I couldn't help it, but when I received the book, I rushed to see if one of my favorite Renaissance anatomists, Andreas Vesalius, and his masterpiece, De Corporis Humani Fabrica, was included. And there it was, a 1555 edition published in Basel. I was advised that the University of Otago's Hocken Library in Dunedin has a room with controlled conditions for reading old manuscripts. There were strict rules. I would be able to have 10 books transferred in installments. However, I would only be able to view 1 book at a time. For the first installment, I selected the manuscripts of all 3 Monro professors, and Hippocrates, his Opera Omnia, published in Geneva in 1657, then Fallopius, Cuvier, and my favorite, Vesalius, of course. With all due respect to the Monro professors, the first book I viewed was De Humani Corporis Fabrica. When the Hocken librarian presented the book on a soft cushion, I was impressed with its size. It was large. As I laid my fingers on the cover page to open it, I noticed I was shivering. My emotions took over. Just the touch of the cover and turning to the first page felt like opening a gigantic gate into the world that I had studied so intently over the years. I was immediately transported back to the times of Vesalius's first dissections, his native Brussels, and University of Padova, where he taught anatomy. I immediately pictured him at the bedside of his patron, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. As I was feeling the density of the edge of the paper, I had tingling in my fingers. Am I really touching the same paper as those great men of science did before me, like the Monros? I was so excited. I started reading the epistle in Latin, as if it was the language I communicated in daily. Suddenly, I realized I had forgotten to put my reading glasses on. Even now, when I remember those moments, I get goosebumps. The whole book consists of 7 volumes, each richly illustrated with magnificent drawings. The drawings are so powerful, showing even the smallest body part described in detail. As I was looking at these drawings, I realized that it was not just a textbook of anatomy. It was an ode to the human body and the perfection of the Creator's mind. Unfortunately, the book is slightly damaged. Some of the pages show visible signs of exposure to dampness. It is no wonder, given it took 7 years for the trip from Edinburgh until it reached New Zealand shores, and 51 more years until it found its permanent home at the University of Otago. How many rough seas had it experienced in its lifetime? Nevertheless, it is a very well-preserved book. After my love at the first page with De Corporis Humani Fabrica and the emotional rendezvous with the 16th century, I was ready for the 18th century and the Monro giants.
Okay, So this is just a very brief overview of what each book consists of and how many chapters are there. So I find it really fascinating that he speaks in 40 chapters about the book 1. Book 4, which is about the nerves, has got 17 chapters. And there are some differences in the chapters between the first and the second edition. The art was, the drawings were done by the Flemish artist who was a scholar, who was actually the pupil of the Jan Steven Titian. His name is Jan Steven Kalkar. I found even some information that on several occasions, even Titian lent a hand himself. They are absolutely remarkable. There was one commentary about why does he put skeletons in the upright position, or why does he show all the muscles in such postures. It is because he actually wanted to celebrate life, what the human body is alive, not what it looks like when dead. And just to let you know, the background landscape, they are the real one. They show the villages around Padova. So even if you go nowadays, you will see those nice hilly slopes and some similar landscape. So what was the praise of Vesalius' work? What was so good about him? He first discovered sinuses of the os frontis, I would say os frontalis, but sphenoidea and maxilla superioris. He first delineated the malleus and incus of the ear. And for the medical doctors, what is missing? Or all those, what is missing? Malleus, incus, stapes. The stirrup is missing. So he knew only about the two of those little bones of the ear. He missed the third one, okay? He first showed the round ligament of the thigh not to be inserted precise into the middle of the round head, but to a side. He remarked the ossa triquetra in our hand. To him, we owe discovery of the ninth muscle of the foot, and he described the ligamentum suspensorium penis. And this is all from the Primus's book. What is his legacy? Gosh, we are coming toward the end. What is his legacy? A revolutionary approach to studying anatomy has an impact not only on the generations of medical professionals, but also on the art. Well, he knew that he would be immortal because that was first of a kind. Now, in the art, Rembrandt, 17th century, 1632, what is wrong with this anatomy lesson of Dr. Nikolai Stoll? By the way, I do like to ask questions during my talk, and there are questions, prize questions later on at the end. So would anybody dare to say what is wrong with this? It looks awesome, doesn't it? And this is one of the most famous paintings of anatomy class, but there is something not quite right. But before I tell you what I think might not be right, I am actually interested in this, which I think is Vesalius' De Humani Corporis Fabrica, this textbook that is here. And also the guy here, he's holding some papers. I think they might be also related to the Humani Corporis Fabrica. Well, what I think is wrong, Dr. Nikolai Stolp, he was professor of anatomy, and I think he was also the vice chancellor, wasn't he? Of the University of Amsterdam. He was even a mayor, and he even wanted to be immortal as well. So he performed among his colleagues, and who had more money could be in the photo as well. But Rembrandt was very sharp. He knew that nobody would start doing dissection on the arm. The first thing that you would do would start where? The organs that would perish first, which would be the intestines. Isn't it? So you would never start on the arm first. In those days, the dissections, they lasted from 3 to 8 days. What would the cadaver look like after 8 days? So it would never be just, he would never start with the hand. On the other hand, here we have Vesalius with the arm and the hand anatomy. Here we have Dr. Tulp. And why? He wanted actually to recreate Vesalius, because Vesalius was of the opinion that arm and the mechanics of the arm and the movements that we have in our arms are of immense, immense importance. And so Dr. Tulp, he wanted us to be as famous. Now, what do we have here? All these men, do they actually look at the cadaver? No, they don't. Each of them looks elsewhere. And they are like surprised. But if you look at them, each one goes and looks elsewhere. So that's my take. Okay, so anatomy. We love anatomy. It's got bright and dark sides. And this is where I would like to tell you something about the anatomy that has happened, some beautiful examples and some really a little bit dodgy ones. And thanks to Richard German, we did it in the medical room, medical history room here at the Health Science Library at the University of Otago. And it's really, really remarkable. You will enjoy it. Good afternoon, Richard. Thank you very much for talking about your beautiful medical collection here at the Health Science Library at the University of Otago in Dunedin. You have been a medical librarian or health science librarian for very many years. What does anatomy mean to you?
Really, this collection was this special collections area was really founded as an anatomy collection, because the founding collection, of course, was the Monroe collection. We had a few items prior to that. The Monroe collection's arrival in 1929. Of course, it's heavily anatomy. We don't store that collection here anymore because we didn't have any space. So we've got it over in special collections, but it's still part of the University of Otago. The core of the collection in here is anatomical and surgical. So really it's all about anatomy. Here you've got some very interesting early editions of the anatomy atlases. This one was a donation just from 2009 actually. We were gifted this book, which is it's from 1677. It's probably the first example that we have anyway of what you might call an anatomy pop-up book. So it's the Pinax Microcosmographicus from Johannes Remelin, and it sounds very Dutch. He was a Dutchman, and so the index here is in Latin and Old Dutch. But it's only a very few leaves. I think it's only about 6 or 7 leaves in total, and it's of course disintegrated. We don't have the cover anymore, but it's a wonderful example of an anatomy pop-up book where you can actually move through the layers and move further and further. I think there's 7 layers deep, where you can go through and actually peel apart the body layers. We have the skull here going down through the meninges and then into the brain itself. So the first portrait here is male. I'm not using gloves deliberately because I washed my hands, but because the edges are quite friable, using gloves can actually increase further damage. Yes. So then, second one is a female. Or again, you can go through the layers. And then the third, and there is this, because this is from the 17th century, it's full of religious symbolism. And one of our academics has actually investigated this book quite extensively and published articles about it. It was interesting because although the book itself is fascinating, the story of the woman who donated it to us is equally fascinating. Oh, right. Because she wasn't able to tell us, but she worked in Bletchley Park in the Second World War, in the same hut, if you like, that Alan Turing was in. So now we have, we actually have here the pregnant abdomen, and you can peel back through the layers right down to the fetus. To the fetus, yes. So it's just exquisite. It is. It is. And although there are several copies of this in the world, I think this is the most intact copy. So it's just one of the many treasures that we have in the library.
Absolutely.
This is my favourite one that I love showing people.
That's absolutely remarkable. And I know from my previous research of the Monroe collection that you've got a fascinating albinus anatomy atlas. So I suggest we go to albinus next.
We have.
So this is one of the books by
Yes,
albinus.
this is probably the most impressive one. It's quite large, as you can see. The date is 1749. And again, we can see, and it's showing its age. It's,
But the paper is quite thick.
it is.
It's quite solid.
Actually, it's remarkably long-lasting. I mean, it's not vellum; it is paper.
It is, yes.
But it is sufficiently high quality that it has so far lasted nearly 300 years.
So here we've got like a drawing
Yeah,
or
drawings.
artistic presentation of human body, and here we've got all those small numbers
Which
that-
are indexed in the text.
Yes.
So,
Would you agree if I say that the fashion for having such a large books goes back to Vesalius' time, because he was the first one to
a lot of these
print?
are quite reminiscent of Vesalius.
Yes, yes.
They're often, the backgrounds are equally fascinating. I mean, the figures are exquisite, but the backgrounds are just so incredibly detailed. And these were all done, I guess, from woodcuts or copper plate cuts. Yeah, they're very, very, they're beautiful. These things are works of art.
Works of art. Richard, what have we got here?
This is probably one of the more controversial books that we have in our collection. It's an anatomical atlas developed by Edward Pernkopf. This is extremely controversial because Pernkopf was an ardent Nazi, and he became the equivalent of the Vice Chancellor of the University of Vienna during the Nazi regime. And so his atlas, it's an exquisite atlas. It is still probably one of the most exquisitely beautiful atlases, but it's terribly tainted because not all, a lot of the subjects, or a number of the subjects, were from executed political prisoners. And also his team of illustrators were also Nazis, and they showed their affiliation or love of the Nazi regime by incorporating just subtle things into their, this is just a typical illustration, but on the signature, Ernst Liepy incorporated a swastika into his surname. And that is bad enough, but the fact that we don't know the provenance of the subjects, certainly the number of bodies that were delivered to the University of Vienna School of Medicine increased dramatically during the Second World War.
Here you can see swastika. Yeah, I hope it's large enough so you can see swastika. Right here and then. And we have come to the end of my lecture. I hope you have learned a little bit more about anatomy. Why do we love anatomy, and why I recommend that we should study anatomy, and particularly at the University of Otago. This is what ex-head of department at ex-head of Department of Anatomy at the University of Otago, Professor Lisa Matiso-Smith, said about why should we study anatomy.
In the department, we say anatomy is much more than what you might think it is. And I think the Department of Anatomy at Otago really takes the view of anatomy is more than just the physical body, the muscles and organs and so forth. The department is incredibly strong and incredibly diverse and takes a kind of holistic view of the human body. So we're split into a number of different subdivisions within the department, or subject kind of areas within the department. So we have biological anthropology, looking at human variation. We have neurobiology. We have the classic clinical anatomy, which is what most people think of as anatomy. And we have reproduction, genomics, and development. So it really is a very broad understanding of what makes, what influences a person, from the very basic foundation of your bones, your muscles, and your organs, through to our social connections, our connections with the environment, how our brains work. So it really is a holistic view, which I think actually fits extremely well in a Te Ao Māori perspective, a Pacific perspective of understanding kind of health and organisms in a complete environment. So again, it gives a wonderful background and training that is very cross-disciplinary and multidisciplinary, and very broad.
Thank you very much. No wonder I decided to study anatomy
Exactly.
here at the
Want to
university.
study anatomy at the University of Otago.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was all from me to you. And now there are some questions for you. 3 questions, and there is a prize. Can I please have a, whoever answers correctly gets a chocolate fish. Okay, so do you know who is this lady in the first photo? And this is also the answer to the gentleman that asked me about it last time. Who she is? She's very pretty. Anybody dares to answer? See it, that this is a little exam, little test. Anyway, I wanted to give you a little bit more information about her. Her name is Elena Lucrezia Corner. There is another surname, sorry. She was the first woman graduate at the university in the world. She graduated at the age of 32 in 1678, I think it was 25th of June. She wanted to study theology, but she was not allowed to, so she studied philosophy and she graduated. She comes from Venice, from a very noble family, and unfortunately she died at the age of 38. So, chalky fish for me. Okay, the second question is, what is this? Do you know what this is? Oh, come on, you must know what this is. What does that look to you? Oh, chocolate fish, here you are. Yes, it is Galileo's podium. It is located in the room called La Sala di 40, where 40 of his students, including William Harvey, have got their portraits on the wall. And this is the stand from which Galileo Galilei taught his students. Okay, what is the third question? Come on, look how many chocolates are there. What does that look like to you? Come on, doctors. Sorry? Sorry, what? Sorry, here you are. This is the 5th vertebra reproduction, this time, of course, of the, oops, sorry, gosh. Need more practice in the Renaissance attire. So this is the 5th vertebra of Galileo Galilei. It is reproduction, but they swear that they do have, it's like a relic, they do have the original one. Thank you very much for being my audience. I hope I took you down to the memory lane from the 16th century Renaissance to studying anatomy in the 21st century at the University of Otago, of course. And I hope to see you again at one of my lectures in the next year. Thank you very much. Gratia vobis ago.
Now, do we have any questions? Could you tell us, do you know any more about Jan van Kalkar, who did the drawings? Now, he was presumably a Fleming, but he was in Titian's studio in Venice. Did he work for the University of Padua? Do you know any more about him, van Kalkar?
Kalkar, from what I know, is that he was doing everything under the very close supervision of Vesalius. He was also, the previous work of Vesalius was the 6 anatomical tables, or tabulae anatomicae sixtus, and he was, the first 3, Vesalius did it himself. He painted them himself. The other 3 did Kalkar. So he was very closely working with Vesalius. For me, it's a little bit unusual to understand that somebody can produce 2 paintings a week, 2 drawings a week of that substantial quality and so detailed. I believe that he also had some of his co-workers from the Titian atelier, but he was one of the most prominent. Yes. And so it took 4 years. They say it started in winter. European winter is usually December to February, so it was winter 1539 to 1540 in that time period, and it was finished by 1542. And it was then published in 1543, sorry.
Any questions? Other questions? Yes, Stephen.
Oh.
Wait, Stephen.
Thank you. Presumably the working during the winter was because it was too hot in Padua in the summer to have the dissections. Was that so?
So yes, no, that makes sense. But you know, whenever they had the dissections, usually in those days, it was about 1 or 2 a year. However, Vesalius was very smart. He befriended the main judge, who was quite fond of Vesalius's work. And so he made sure that all of those people who were executed ended up on Vesalius's table. There is also a story that Vesalius himself also snitched bodies from the graves. And I didn't want to go into detail about his story later after the De Humani Corporis Fabrica. He was actually quite, he wasn't very much appreciated by his contemporaries, some of his contemporaries who were very much traditionalist and still followers of the Galen's anatomy. So he became a court physician, first at the court of Charles V, who was his patron, who actually paid for all those publications. And then he was at the court of his son, Philip II in Spanish court. But it is said, I don't know whether it's a myth or whether it's a truth, that he performed dissection on a person whose heart was still beating. And as a way of penitence, he went on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. On his way back from Jerusalem, he contracted either plague or some kind of infectious diseases, typhoid maybe, and he died at Zakynthos in Greece. So we don't know exactly when he died. Some people say it was in early 1564. He was not even 50 when he died. His grave is unknown, but he is immortal through his work. And I would like to use this opportunity also to thank Richard for bringing, this is the reproduction of the De Humani Corporis Fabrica. We also have the second edition, the original second edition in the special collections. And these are just some of the translations. So you can see these 2 large volumes. They are translated from Latin into English, and you are very welcome to have a look on your way out.
Any other questions? No more questions. Please join me in thanking Mirjana.
So just to end on a high note, I've got here something that is called, the author is the author. The designer is Salvatore Ferragamo, a very famous Italian designer. And he recreated a perfume called, yes, Renaissance. So this is his take. He was from Tuscany. He was he worked. He was, I think he was even raised in Florence. He's a famous Florentine, and he recreated this perfume based on his memories of Florence and Renaissance. So you are very welcome. That's how I would also. When I smelled it, I thought, gosh, it brought me back to 15th, 16th century Florence immediately. So you're very welcome to spray, you know. So there is the sensual feeling of, oops, I shouldn't be near the books. Sensual, but there's just contemporary prints. So yes, if it smells, in my opinion, it reminds me very much of Chanel number 19. So you're very welcome to spray yourself and have that feeling of Renaissance. And also, please help yourself with chocolates. Thank you so much. Thank you.